Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk a little bit about the third day and the importance of the number 17 and how it relates to the third day. And I'm really glad that I watched these videos by Pastor Sandy Armstrong, because one of the things that I realized, aside from the importance of the number 17, is that all of these examples that he gave of the third day actually had something to do with DNA. Of course, that's not what he was talking about in the video, but it helped me to realize even more how what the third day is all about is the restoration of the DNA. And I'll just give you one example for now, and that will be Hosea 6:1 and 2, where it says, "Come and let us return to the Lord, for he hath torn us, and he will heal us. He hath smitten us, and he will bind us up. After 2 days he will revive us. In the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight." And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about, is how the third day seems to almost always relate to the DNA. There's imagery of the DNA. It's always about renting or cleaving, and then cleaving or renting and binding. That seems to be the theme throughout the Bible concerning the third day, and I believe that's all imagery for the restoration of the DNA. And it's really interesting because over here he's saying that the gematria for the word good in the Hebrew is the number 17. And he's talking about how when God created the light, the sun and the moon, it says over here, "And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also, and he set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good." So he's saying over here that the light is good, and of course the light represents Jesus. So it's saying that Jesus is good, or Jesus is 17. So he's talking about the number 17, the gematria. And it's in verse 17 that God set the lights in the firmament, and then he saw that it was good, and the gematria for good is 17. But what I noticed when I was looking at Genesis, because the other thing that he talked about was the third day, and it was after the third day that it says over here, I'm going to start with verse 11. It says, "And God said, Let the earth bring forth the grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so, and the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and it was the third day." Okay, so he's mentioning the third day here, that God gathered. Actually should have started with verse 10. That's when God gathered the waters, and he's talking about how in Revelation 17 the waters represents the nations, and so he's gathering from all the nations the seas in the third day, and God saw that it was good. And so this would be a picture of the rapture, the gathering on the third day. But what I noticed in verse 11 is that that's the first mention of the seed. And the word for seed in the Greek is the word sperm. The word sperm is used for both seed and for sperm. That's why sometimes in the New Testament, when it's talking about sperm, it actually calls it seed, or when it says the seed of the woman, it's actually talking about sperm, because it's the same word in the Greek. And I imagine it's probably that way in the Hebrew as well. But this is the first mention of the word seed, and it comes up in verse 11. And so I want to talk more about how this all has to do with DNA, but I want to go back to Hosea 6 for a minute, and I just want to point something else out over here where it says, "Come and let us return to the Lord, for he hath torn us." And what's really interesting is I looked up this word for torn in the Greek. Well, of course, in the Hebrew, it means to rend or rent, just as the veil was rent. It means to tear, to rend. But it's interesting what this word is in the Greek, and I'll just show it to you. It's this word right here, irpaken, and this is actually a form of the word arpazo. So you can see that here, irpaken. It's a form of the word arpazo. That's the root word, and that means to seize, snatch, catch, pluck, take away by force. Okay, so I just thought that was interesting because in the Greek it's saying, "For he has raptured us, and he will heal us. He has smitten, and he will bind us up." And this goes back to the number 17, because right now our present condition is good and evil, but what Jesus is going to do is he's going to cast out the evil half. That's why the DNA needs to be rent. That's just the imagery that God is using to represent our present condition. And then it has to cleave so that both sides are good. So both sides are 17. Okay, so now I want to talk a little more about the third day and how it relates to the number 17 and possibly the number 18th, because it's actually believed that the third day was the 17th of Nisan, when Jesus rose from the dead on first fruits, but actually the 17th would have been the Sabbath, and then the morrow after the Sabbath would have been the 18th. So it was actually on the 18th that Jesus resurrected, but the Sabbath is important as well. And so this is a parallel for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the entire 7,000 years, the 6,000 years from creation plus the millennium. And then Jesus came after 4,000 years. So this is a direct parallel to the Passover, because this would have been the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which would have been Thursday. And you have Friday, and then Saturday, and then Sunday is the fourth day, or the 18th of Nisan. That's when Jesus came. But then Sunday becomes the first day. It's the Lord's Day. So then you have Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So this would be the third day as well. And so the end of 6,000 years is also the third day. So the sixth day can also be the third day. That's one of the points that Pastor Sandy was making in his video as well. And I just want to show you something interesting that he pointed out. He said that in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 7, which looks like 2017, it actually has the word 1,000 6 times. And then the sixth one is in verse 17. So the question is 2017 the end of the 6,000 years? So I just thought that was interesting. But it appears the 18th might be important as well, because there's also this timeline over here that seems to be pointing to 2018. You have this parallel with the 1,948 years, which of course it was in 1948 that Israel became a nation. And so from 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, you had 1,948 years. And so you have this continuous parallel with the numbers 1,948. But you also have a pattern with 1947. You see over here that it's 1,947 years to 2017 from when the temple was destroyed, and then 70 years from the resolution, the commandment for the restoration of Israel. And then it's saying here from the time Abraham was conceived rather than the time he was born. That would have been 1947, the conception of Abraham, to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD would be 2017 years. And then over here you have 50 Jubilees from the time of Adam to the Exodus. And then, as I've shown in the prophecy in Daniel, there's 70 Jubilees from the Exodus to 2017. And then when you add the 50 to the 70, that's 120 Jubilees. So that's a total of 6,000 years. But then again, the number 18 seems to be important as well. And if you look at the books of the Bible, you see that Esther is the 17th book. But one of the reasons why I had pulled up the books of the Bible is because I was curious to see what number Ruth was, and that's when I noticed that Daniel was the 27th book. But Ruth is the 8th book of the Bible. So again, you have both numbers mentioned, and this was a Sabbath. So the Sabbath is the 7th day, but Jesus actually resurrected on the 8th day, the morrow after the Sabbath. So this is considered the 8th day, and it was on the 18th of Nisan. So it could be anywhere between these two dates. That may be why some of these tables go through to the year or to the scriptures 2018. But then again, some of them just go through 17. Here's another one that I tried. This is short for Yeshua and appearance, and it came up in these verses. And this was really interesting. I put in Yeshu confirm covenant, and this came up in Galatians 3:17. That's where it talks about Jesus confirming the covenant, and that's in verse 17. It says, "Now this I say, a covenant confirmed beforehand by God, the law, which came 430 years after, doth disannul, so as to make the promise of none effect." So it's talking about Jesus confirming the covenant, and it's in verse 17. And then here's another one I tried. In this one I put metamorph, Yahweh, dead, rise, Ruth, and Pentecost. And all those came up, and they came up in this range of scriptures. But the reason I put in the word metamorph is because the transfiguration, which is mentioned in Matthew 17, verses 1 through 7, is where it talks about the transfiguration. But the word for transfigured is the word metamorph. It's where we get the word metamorphosis from. You see that over here. And so it means to change into another form, to transform or transfigure. And so, like I said, that was coming up in Matthew 17, verses 1 through 7, is where it talks about that. And so I did a table on metamorph. I actually did a couple of tables, but this one comes up in Ezekiel 44, verses 11 through 18, but it's in verse 17 where it says, "And it shall be that when they enter in at the gates of the inner court," and of course this is the millennial temple, which is our body. It's talking about entering into the inner court, and that's in verse 17. And so I'm about out of time, so I'll have to continue in the next video. Thank you.